like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello, Internet. Welcome to another great day of conversation. Yep. Today I've got, he says he was just a troop. That he was, but he's also written a book. So he was involved with great things, or maybe not so great things, but he was there. Did his national service between 1981 and 82, or during 1981 and 82. I know he served with some great fellows, and I know he was part of some great operations too, because I have placed a photo of him before hanging his legs out of a chopper or smiling brightly at the camera. So who am I speaking with today, or who are we speaking with today at Legacy, from Legacy Conversations point of view? It's great to welcome Evan here with us today. Evan Davies, he's going to tell us bits and pieces and also all about his book. Thanks for contacting us, Evan, and thanks for wanting to talk with us. Thank you. All over to you now.
Well, it's a great pleasure, Fossey, and I want to thank Koos also, who can be here today. My name is Evan Davies. I was a national serviceman. I got called up for 1981 and finished at the end of 1982. I had no idea what it was going to be like. Came from quite a protected background where nothing ever happened. We got our first television set in 1977. I might have known what a rattle was. I can't really remember. It was a vague thing. When I got the call up in 1978, it was just, it just caused a lot of fear, and I went unwillingly. And I have to say, the first 6 months, we had to be pushed, all of us, very unwilling. And then after that, everything kind of changed. So just a little bit about my background. My family was, my mother's family were Afrikaans. They were farmers from the Clanwilliam area. My father's family were English. That's in a South African context. Actually, they were Irish and Welsh, so English didn't come into it. So anyway, when I got called up, you know, we went through the whole thing of we had to be dropped off at the castle in Cape Town and then catch the train, which took 2 days to Bloemfontein, and then be treated miserably for 6 months. Very, very unhappy. In the book, I write about all these experiences, and I hope I managed to capture the language and the wild characters that we encountered in that time. But now the training was infantry training, so I went to one side, and for the first 6 months it was basic infantry training, and then it switched to mechanized infantry training, more specialized. And we had to go for different categories. You could either remain a rifleman, or you could join the mortars, or you could join the drivers or the gunners. So I went for the mortars. Me and a couple of friends of mine, you had to run and get into a squad. So we ran like hell and got into the squad. And then we were in. And we were just told to fetch our baggage from the bungalow and move to a new bungalow, and that was it. And that's how I became a mortarist. And we trained largely in the Brook. We dropped showers of bombs for 3 months through the coldest part of the year, and then we were all reconstituted again, and for mechanized infantry training. And that's when we really got to grips with rattles for the first time. And we did that for about 3 months. It was very intensive. You know, first with infantry training, you start off with section tactics, and you do a lot of that. and then you progress to platoon tactics, and you progress to live ammunition, and then you start working out of the vehicles, and then you start working out of the vehicles with live ammunition, with the 20mm cannons going, and the bombs falling, and all this was done out at the Brug. And then suddenly, I'd say it was about 9 months into 1981, everything changed, as we got a company commander who was absolutely fantastic. And this was Captain Jan Malan. And he was fair-minded. He didn't hold it against anyone who wanted to drop out. And in fact, I suppose he didn't really want people who didn't want to go with him. And one or two guys, he just quietly allowed to leave without, denigrating them or anything. And he's a religious man, so he prayed with us, and in all training he was present. He was with us, 20 hours a day. He was in our lives, and he pushed us as a company. I think at this time there were 5 big training companies, and there was only one spot for a company at 61 Mech, which was on the border. And he pushed us to be the company that won the election, the evaluations. So we worked really hard at it, and we won every single evaluation, everything from running to shooting to drill to tactics to everything you can think of, and written exam. And that's how we ended up being renamed Alpha Company, and we were eventually sent to 61 Mech. So at the beginning, I think it was about the beginning of January 1982, we got into a Flossie at Bloemfontein, flew over Botswana, and we landed at Grootfontein. Now you're probably very familiar, you have a safety cylinder above the airfields, and planes must land within the cylinder. And so this was our first experience of that, coming in at height. I don't know how high we were, probably like 25,000 feet or something. And suddenly this plane just went into a spiral dive. It just dropped a wing. And I can distinctly remember someone in the plane threw up, and nearly everyone could see this thing hovering in the air, choosing where it was going to fall. And so that was our first experience, lurching out of the sky and then touching down at Grootfontein. And so the cool adventure really started then. And because we had great officers, everything changed from what it had been in the first year. And we spent, let me think, probably 2 months then based at Oshivelo, and we did counter-insurgency training. And so it's a misconception people have often that 61 Mech guys are just guys who sit in rattles like they're in buses, and then they get driven to the scene of action, and then they get out and they fight, and they get back in the rattles and they drive home. It's not like that at all. So we were intensively trained in counter-insurgency ops, coin ops. We did lots of sort of jungle lane training, quick kill training. We trained in the operational area, as people may not realize today. The training took place in and around Oshivelo, the Mangeti block, and we would be deployed and we would set ambushes, and this was a live area. I think in the February, we were sent up to an area to the west of Ondangwa to do patrols. And we were in the veld for the whole month among the Kukas. We had a couple of little adventures because there was SWAPO activity in the area. And that was a great experience. It was tough. I mean, when I smile and I say things were great, things were hard. There was always, when you get thrown in with a pack of guys and you're all young, there's bound to be, fights and arguments and and discipline has to be harshly imposed and all that. So things were always tough. They never stopped being tough. But I can say that we did enjoy it. And in spite of all the hardships, I look back on that time as a wonderful time. So then at the end of 1982, we were deployed to 6-1 Mech. And that's where we once again stepped into Rattles, because we had trained with them for about 6 months. The Rattles at 6-1 Mech were a bit different. They were configured differently. You know, the ones back in the States, as we call the Free State, they had adjustable mirrors on the sides. No, that's just ridiculous in the bush. So these things had a couple of refinements to make them bushwise vehicles. And then we started proper training at 6-1 Mech, which was commanded by Commandant Roland de Vries. And we had huge respect for him and a lot of fear as well. I know now today, I've met him, and he's a wonderful man, a very human person. But as the commander of 6-1 Mech, he was quite fierce. And so we would never, you know, we always stood in fear in front of him. But so we did a lot of large-scale training, definitely in the Mangeti block. This was our stomping ground for 6-1 Mech. We could just drive around in there and do all kinds of operations, integrating artillery and doing long advances to contact over several days, fighting through an objective, clearing, sweeping, and then retreats. And then there'd be retreats under different circumstances, you know, whether it's a forced retreat or whatever. And so you could spend a week in the wilderness just living out of the Rattles. And the sheer quantity of live ammunition that we expended, it must have cost an absolute fortune. You know, if you're in a contact, you use up a lot of ammunition quickly, but we used up a lot of ammunition quickly in training, just as if we were in contact. So what happened then? Then all of a sudden, in the beginning of April, we were informed that there was a big incursion was coming down through Avambaland. And I just, you know, read afterwards, after the army, long after the army, because we didn't know at the time, we were just 19-year-olds, that this was an elite SWAPO battalion known as the Volcano Group. And they were specially trained for a deep incursion into Southwest Africa. And they were very well armed. They were well led. I don't know the number now offhand, but it was between 100 and 200 guys, and they were deploying in a single group. So we were suddenly informed one afternoon that we had to bomb up and move within 6 hours down to Tsumeb, which was going to be the base of operations for a big area operation to counter the threat of the Volcano Group. And so that afternoon, we were in our Rattles. We turned south onto the Tar Road because Omotia is just to the north of Oshivelo. So we turned left onto the road to drive towards Oshivelo. And as we were driving, we were sitting in the Rattles, and suddenly we heard two dull thuds, like boom, boom. And there was a strong smell of rubber. And I think we were between Omotia and Oshivelo, so we hadn't even gone far, a few kilometers. And we all stuck our heads up out of the Rattle to see what was happening. And one of the guys was sitting outside one of the hatches, leaning with his back against the spare wheel, which would be tied onto the engine, on top of the engine. And what had happened was that the Rattle driving behind us, we were call sign 1-1. The one behind us was 1-1 Alpha. the gunner had let off 2 shots with his Browning, and these had gone into the spare wheel, our spare wheel, and probably less than 20 centimeters to the left of where this guy was sitting. And the 2 bullets tracked through the vehicle, following the cables inside a lamination, and they passed by him. Basically, well, we're talking 5 centimeters or less inside the tire. They went past him and then shot out behind the turret on the left. So they actually tracked around inside the wheel and shot out to the left of the turret into the bush. So we didn't know it then, but this was basically the first sign that the shit was about to hit the fan. So we got to Chumeb, and we regrouped there at the 6-1 Mech headquarters and went into a variety concert for the evening. And but that wasn't even halfway through when Captain Milan came on stage and said, the swappers have been seen. Alpha Company, please leave the room, go to your vehicles. Anyone not here, find them. 10 minutes, orders, and then we're driving. And then almost immediately we were driving north again on another road, the road that will, I think it's the road that will take you to Rundu eventually. So we went up that road and we went to a tiny little place called Sensibus. And Sensibus is just on the border of Avambaland. And there was an order group. There was a small fort at Sensibus. And these little border forts were made with bulldozers. So there was a earth wall in a square, and inside were the tents. And we stayed in the rattles in the dark, and we could see an order group under the rattle spotlight with some bushmen and some other people we didn't know. And then we deployed to, what is it? The Bravo cut line. I think the Bravo cut line, which is probably about 10 kilometers north of Washibelo. Turned left on that, and then we deployed in length, in line abreast along the Bravo cut line, probably for 20 kilometers, with the rattles every few hundred meters and the troops spread out in between, and we waited there all night, because apparently in the path of the volcano group. So the next morning, nothing had happened. And at 10 o'clock, we were just getting ready to pack up and redeploy when news came that Platoon 3, now we were all facing north, we were in the center, Platoon 1, Platoon 3 was on the left, on the far left of the line, Platoon 2 was closest to Sensibus on the right. The news came that Platoon 3 had hit landmines and there were casualties. So we in the center got in our rattles and we sped off down the cut line to support them. And we found that a Black Widow had detonated. The troops had got out to look at spoor on the cut line. And the Black Widow had wounded about 5 people, and one of them very seriously. His leg was taken right off. So we formed a little casevac area for Puma to come. The Puma, when it came, admitted, I think, 1 or 2 patients, most seriously wounded, and then immediately took off and flew back along the Cup lane to the east towards Sensibus. And then we started getting the news that Platoon 2 was in a serious ambush. And what had happened was the spoor had been found on the Cup lane, and the spoor was deliberate. You know, it was, you couldn't miss it. There were ammunition had been dropped, pamphlets, sweet papers, tins of food, and lots of footprints. So it's difficult to assess exactly what happened. I went back there in 2016 and I met one of the local bushmen, and he led me through it. But it seems that what had happened was that they'd followed the spoor north into the bush, and then there was like a shona, an open shona, and they had been joined by some territorial force members with Bushman trackers. So they were, I think there were 5 rattles present, and the one rattle with the territorial force group on it followed the spoor across the Shona to establish its direction on the other side, and with the object of putting a stopper group somewhere to the north. And that Rotel drove into an L-shaped ambush, very well planned, more than 40 SWAPOs, and it was completely gutted, and a whole lot of people were killed. So that was very traumatic for us, and that was became known as Operation Yahoo. And so from the start of Operation Yahoo, we knew that we were in a serious business. Every day was long sweeps through the bush. And at that time in April, the bush was very thick and green. We learned all sorts of things, like you didn't want to be following a spoor towards the setting sun because you can't see anything. So you learn all sorts of tactical things in the bush, counterinsurgency things that, you know, you want to be advancing with the sun behind you. All kinds of things like that that we picked up, things which became second nature. And Ops Yahoo wound down. It took about a month. I think about 100 of the insurgents were killed. But from that moment on, that was the 15th of April to 1982, those bombshells split up into many groups. So it was impossible for a mechanized force like ours to contact them in any effective way. Split up into platoons, and we had territorial force trackers with us, and we were basically bushfighters for the rest of that month. So yeah, that was Operation Yahoo. And then I think I've forgotten that during the month of training at 6-1 Mech before Ops Yahoo, we actually went into Angola. Yes, and we did. But that was just like a Magsvertoning. We drove to Sangongo and Mongoa and what's the other place? Onjiva. I think we were in Angola for about 3 weeks. So it was, the stuff still showed, the place still showed quite a lot of signs from Ops Protea the year before. But everything was very quiet. There seemed to be no presence at all. So yeah, we had already been into Angola for a little bit. Yeah, and then after Ops Yahoo, we did a lot of training for several months, a lot of large-scale training, which got very involved. We organized a system of surrogates so that should a driver be wounded or anything, then there would be surrogate drivers. And I trained to be a surrogate or a help gunner. And then, when was it? Probably in July, we went into Angola properly for Operation Meebos. And the purpose of the operation, which was quite far north of the border, was to try and track down SWAPO training bases and deployment bases around about the Kuvelai area. But 6-1 Mech went merely as a sort of as local security for the helicopter administration areas, which were set up. The people who were really involved were 3-2 Battalion and Parabats, and I think there were a couple of Bamba battalions. Am I correct in saying 201? I can't remember properly, or 101. They were there, and the purpose was to try and locate these bases. The SWAPOs were very jittery, so they would move a base very quickly. Within a few minutes, everyone would be running, and once these guys start running, in a few minutes, they can be a few kilometers in different directions. So the purpose was to try and find a base, and I think 3-2 Battalion's Recce wing was quite active. I think Captain Willem Rutte was involved then. Quite a number of bases were found, some quite successfully. And we set up haags. generally about 12, 15 kilometers from a base. And then from there, the helicopters could land. Troops, tired troops could be brought back, new troops could be flown in, water could be flown in, extra ammunition, and so on. So setting up one of these bases, and I think it was in the Kublai area, I remember sitting on the Ratel, and suddenly I saw these big gray puffs of smoke forming in the bush around us. And not too close, luckily. And it turned out these were the 122 mil Grad P shells being fired out of Kublai. So we had to quickly set up a new house somewhere else, and then they didn't know where we were. And that base attack was quite successful, I believe. I think 3-2 Battalion had walked in through the night, and we saw how they deployed. I mean, these guys were pretty impressive. They would walk in through the night for more than 30 kilometers in really heavy kit. We're talking of a completely black night in thick bush. These guys would carry a lot of 81 millimeter mortars, heavily loaded. And then once they had set up in a position where they could form a sweep line, at dawn on the day of the attack, the parabats would be flown in to set up stopper groups on the other side of the base. And so we would see the long lines of Pumas coming in at first light. They would overfly the Hach, get their direction and go in. And then we would be able, if we were near a radio in one of the vehicles, we could listen to, all the chatter that went on. We could hear what gunship pilots were saying. We could get a fix on what was going on. So there was one attack there. I don't remember the date or anything that I think was quite successful. But then we had an interesting adventure. Quite out of the blue, we were sitting in a Haag, nothing much was going on. And at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we suddenly got the news, platoon 1, form up. And then we got our orders. We were going to be flown in to the road that comes to that supports Kublai from the north, the road between Techomatet and Kublai. We were going to be flown close to that road, and we were going to set up an on-foot infantry ambush there, because it had been established that Kublai was about to be reinforced with a lot of supplies and ammunition, and it was evidently supporting SWAPO bases in its vicinity. So we were not fighting FAPLA, but we wanted to tell them that they couldn't support SWAPO. I think that was the idea. And so this was, our ambush was going to be plausibly deniable. So we were given orders by Captain Milan. He accompanied us on this platoon-sized operation. At the helicopters, which I think were already parked in the Haag. They were just sitting there waiting for something to happen. We used 4 Pumas and 2 Alouettes, and the Alouettes went off ahead to a place where we were going to be dropped off. But we were given very good orders very quickly by Captain Milan. Sand model in the very simple sand model, but what it did was it was aligned in the ground with using sticks to show where every one of us was going to go. So we all had an extremely clear idea of how to deploy. We blacked up, and that's the photograph you've seen. That's the flight that we took, 6-1 Mech in helicopters. And I think we were dropped off about 10 kilometers to the south of the road, and then we walked. We first put on lots of camo, lots of grass all over us, and we were extremely heavily loaded, more than normal, because we were going out where there was no effective support. We could possibly have air support, but there was no immediate any other kind of support or way of extracting us quickly. So I just remember when the helicopters were disembarking us. I was in the lead helicopter, so it was the first to land, and I was in the middle, as you can see in the photo, and I was to jump first. And this helicopter was hovering about 2 meters off the ground, and I had like a cement bag and a half on my back. And I just thought, well, you know, if I jump this distance, they're going to have to carry me home. So I just turned to the pilot and I shouted, "Go lower." And incredibly, I think he was a major, he went lower, and we were able to step out of the helicopters. And then we walked and we arrived at the sand road, which was really, I mean, it was just a track. It was just a soft sand track through the trees. I would imagine it's not even an easy thing to find from the air. And there were trees. The trees in that area were like these tall poles with little tuft of leaves at the top and not much cover on the ground. I think it was, you know, well into the dry season, and the termites had eaten a lot of the grass. And so we just lay down. The front section was about 15 meters from the road, and we formed a line. The line was probably, I think that was 2 sections. It was probably about 40 meters long. I don't really remember. And then the rear section, so there's a front line, and the rear section was in a semicircle at the back, as facing outwards, back the direction we'd come. And we, the mortars, were in the middle. Captain was very specific with every single person what to do. We had used 4 Pumas, and there were 12 guys in each Puma. I know that for a fact. So there were 48 of us in total, more than the actual platoon. But what we had drawn extra RPG and mag operators from some of the other platoons, and we had an extra medic, and we had an intelligence officer who came with us from another unit. And then we waited. The night was very quiet. We waited all night. We slept one section at a time, stayed awake. And then at about, I don't know, very early in the morning, no sign of dawn yet, but the moon was sinking. So it was a waning moon. It was sinking in the west, in the treetops. Then we could hear vehicles, and they were coming from the north. And it's the sort of thing where you don't clearly hear the vehicles. You hear a kind of a subsonic rumble, because everything's so quiet, but you can hear that. And but as they came closer, we could hear them changing gears and things, and they were lights out, and they were in first and second gear, feeling their way in the darkness. And the captain came on the radio. We had a radio with his captain's orderly was with us at the mortar position. Captain Milan was right in the front on the left, at the exit of the ambush, and he was telling us conversationally, "Wees kalm," to stay calm, wait for my order. And we all felt calm. It was fantastic, actually. It was, all the training was just for this moment. And then he said, "Mortar, hang the bomb, fire." And at that point, the first 2 trucks were coming across the front of the ambush. Pitch dark, but the moonlight they were high above us, black shapes, but the moonlight was shining in the windscreens. And then he said, "Hang the bomb, fire." And then all hell broke loose. I think there was something like 5 RPGs and 5 mags, all opened up, and then 30 odd R4s and claymores, and my bombs were going off. And I was shooting in a pattern. I was shooting an illumination across the road. We also had flares on the other side of the road, so that the whole ambush was backlit, so anyone there would form a silhouette. So I was shooting an illumination across the road, and in a pattern. and then one HE left 100 meters, two HEs right 500 meters. And I was just repeating this pattern as fast as we could go. And then 6-1 Mech on our patrol mortars, the Patmores, we put in a static firing pin. Usually it had a firing pin that you pull a little string, and then the firing pin would go click. So, but we just dropped bombs and shot. So we were able to achieve a very high rate of fire. And the convoy was now stopped. I saw the first truck drive out of the ambush on the left, lurching on and off the verge. And then the second truck came to a stop, and it was very quickly demolished. But anyway, one shot through an engine block, and the thing's dead. And then we could hear through all this. I mean, we had the radio very close to us. We could hear the order, turn the mags up the road, and just saw a river of tracers shooting north up the road to where the convoy was stopped. And my bombs were landing in the convoy because I was shooting north, parallel to the road, but slightly to the left. So pretty sure they were causing trouble there. And then the truck in front was loaded with 122mm shells, probably about 10 tons of the stuff, and they started exploding right in front of us. So it was like a disco. The flashes of light was like a strobe light, you know, and we were all being lit by this like pa 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 things going off, big explosions. So we how we walked out of the ambush was predetermined. We just did it at a walk. We got out of there, no casualties. And then, I don't know if it's true, the other accounts don't mention it, but I think the position was mortared with the from further up the convoy. I think that because of the, you know, there was a target, it was fully well lit. And I think as we walked away, we could hear mortars falling and exploding, but I can't be sure of that. And then we walked about 1.5 kilometers away, directly away from the road. And at that point, the sun was starting to come up. And we had an observation post 400 meters off to our northern side. And that reported that he thought he could hear tanks. So I think there weren't tanks, but you can imagine, you know, that guys would think, would give such an idea the benefit of the doubt. So the platoon sergeant, Corporal Robinson, he went off to the north with all the extra RPG guys and a couple of the mag gunners to form a little delaying group, I suppose. But they were able to come back fairly soon because the captain by that stage had called in for escort, and 2 F1s came in overhead. And that was, you know, you're 19 and you've seen war movies and you've read books, but this was way cooler. Jets diving in and your support coming in over your position and low, coming in low. And we could actually smell the Jet A1 descending into the trees over us. And then they shot onto the road with their 40mm guns for a little bit. But they said they couldn't really see anything. They could see the burning truck, but not much else. I suppose they moved too fast and mainly high. So we went in a walk back to the road. We approached it. We went in a circular walk and approached it from the Tetrametet direction, again from the, from the south, from the Kuvalai direction. So we went further south and then made a sweep line and approached the ambush site up the road with sections on either side of the road. And at that point, Alouettes joined us, and they started shooting and said, "No, there's a whole convoy here, and there's people trying to reclaim it, trying to get it going again. And so we went pretty quickly up the road, like at the double, and it was a hot day. And I just remember that at the ambush, you know, when we had walked in, every single troop was carrying one HE mortar bomb. And when we set up the ambush, they all came and dropped their mortar bombs with us, the 2 mortarists. And we had to load all the bombs that hadn't been shot into a backpack. So I had a backpack full of bombs, and it was heavy as hell, and they were clanking away as I ran. So that was, you know, not enjoyable, but you look back on it and enjoy it. And then we got back to the ambush site, and we had a little contact with Fakla Infantry, and drove them off, killed some. And then Parabats arrived, and we set about looking for trucks that could still drive, and we found 2 that were operational. Whatever we couldn't start, we then destroyed with an RPG. And we drove back towards the 6-1 Mech area in these 2 Ural trucks, I believe. The one was full of ammo, and the other was full of food. So the battalion like scored all this strange food. It was nice stuff. It was, I think, stuff from Scandinavia, like tuna, milk products, various things like that. So we looked at that for a while. And then I suppose Ops Meebos wound down. We went back to 6-1 Mech. And yeah, not much more to report from the year. And then after clearing out in December, at the end of December, I had written a whole lot of stuff in notebooks. And it was just, you know, a thing describing that ambush, a thing describing the ambush against us in Operation Yahoo, and other incidents, funny things. So I then went and studied architecture, and I became an architect. And in about 1990, I started piecing all these bits of writing together, and got a manuscript together, and I tried to get it published. But, you know, in the 1990s, publishers didn't want this stuff. It was all in New South Africa, and this stuff was unfashionable. And in fact, the reason I wrote the book was because when you got out of the army, you had a very unsatisfying experience in that it had been very intense, and you'd been with a lot of people, and you all understood a certain thing. And then when you left, you were high and dry. You went back to your families and other people who you couldn't tell anyone anything about it. I mean, you could start telling, and then you'd see that they were not interested. So I started writing really to an imaginary audience that was receptive, like, you know, as if it was someone who was a good friend, and I was writing to someone, because it was very intense, and this stuff was just boiling inside me for years and years, and so it was, I suppose, an exercise to get it out. But as I say, no one wanted to publish that at that time. So then the manuscript just lay in the, you know, on the shelf somewhere in a drawer, collecting dust. And I thought, well, this will never get published. And then, I became an architect, worked as an architect, but then I went farming. I decided, you know, because I've had some farmers on my mother's side, I went farming in the Klein Karoo. Didn't make any money, but I enjoyed it a great deal. And it was very rough, very remote area at the end of a 50-kilometer dirt road. And I had a family, and a bit later on, I think it was in 2014, I had a serious back injury, and I was on all kinds of pills. I think the one was Lyrica. And this thing put me in the mood to write. I don't know, it induced some kind of thought process. So while I was unable to move around very much, I got onto the manuscript and I started organizing it into a better book, and I rewrote it. So as I say in my prologue or whatever, that I actually wrote the book 3 times. Once as a national serviceman when I was a child. Secondly, 10, 12 years later. And then thirdly, when I was like just about an old guy and had read a lot of history of the war and all sorts of other military history. And so it was the book's written by 3 distinctly different people. And then, this was, we're just sort of starting into social media and things. And I heard that Roland de Vries was going to launch a book at one of the moth halls in Cape Town. And so I went and I met him, and it was quite cathartic to meet him and he was so nice. And we had quite a bit of discussion at that time on Facebook and sending each other messages for a little while. But he said, no, publish it and send it to this publisher, Helion, which is in the UK. And so I sent them 3 chapters and they accepted it instantly. But I had to basically edit it myself. So I did that in my, on the medication that I was on, which seemed to just enable me to write and have a sense of humor and keep going. And I wrote it and the book got published. So that's essentially the story of the book. So I've talked quite a lot. Maybe you can prompt me.
Okay, I'll prompt you. Give us the title of the book, please, Evan.
Okay, the book is called Teenage Safari. I don't know if you can see it. That should be quite good.
Yep, and there's that photo of you, big fat smile on your face. You've still got that smile. You've still got the twinkle in your eye, which is a good thing.
Thanks.
Yeah, so available in SA, available worldwide. Amazon, give us the details. We will include all the links.
It's available. It was available on Amazon. I know now in South Africa it's available at a place called the Aviation Shop, and I think it's the aviationshop.co.za, but we can find that stuff and put up a link to it. And that's based in Johannesburg or Pretoria. So they are the local agent for the book. It was carried in bookshops for a few years. Remember, this came out in 2017 or 16. So it was in bookshops for a while, but I'm not sure that you'll find it everywhere at the moment.
Your experience there, first up, I sat here with a big fat smile on my face, coming in from 26,000 foot. That could only have been in a Transall. C-160, they were built for that kind of thing. Actually an 18,000 foot per minute rate of descent, and those pilots loved doing it. Those air crews, they absolutely, they would come in from as high as possible, put that thing in a spiral and go straight down to the ground. And when you wiped your eyes, as you say, you were sitting on with the ramp open and wondering what all this heat is, who turned on the oven. Yeah, fantastic experiences. I do thank you really for coming to chat with us. And it's great that it's a little bit more than just, here's the book, please read the book. You've told us your experiences. Did you ever do camps after? Were you ever involved further with the military? Tell us a little bit about that.
No, not really, because, I went to study architecture at Port Elizabeth, and I was there right until the end of the 80s. And they had their own, what would it be, military units. It was the UPE military unit. So I did camps there. And we would go into the Eastern Cape between the Transkei and the Ciskei, which apparently was a sort of there was a little bit of insurgent activity in that area. So these things were a holiday camp compared to, you know, some of the friends who were in my rattle were at Techipa in 1988 in that area. And one of the guys that was in my rattle was killed there. So I don't think he was killed in a contact. Oh, here comes coffee. Thank you. So yeah, I missed out on that, and I'm glad I did because, well, in retrospect, I'm not glad I did. But at the time, I was glad I was missing out on it. But remember, the media was very quiet about these things. So you didn't really know what was going on, but you got the idea that it was getting quite dangerous towards the end of the 80s. So yeah, the answer is no, I didn't do proper military camps. We walked patrolling with R1s in the Siskai, which it was really military.
That could have turned nasty too, and on occasion there were incidents there. But you made me smile again. Thanks. I served as a flight engineer at 16 Squadron, so we were accused of flying over UPE, the grazers especially, and there was big palaver about that.
No, I mean, that was discussed. That was discussed at UPE.
Yeah,
that kind of thing. But
yeah, we were.
The res buildings had long, flat concrete roofs.
Yes, yeah. So that landed in the paper, the local paper, the Herald, I think. And that was the period that I served at 16 Squadron. You want to tell us any more? Yeah. Give us the name of the book once again. Show us the book once again.
Okay, well, I've got a few other things that I thought I would like to say. The one was that I didn't get to in the very beginning was that my grandfather was the officer commanding 60 Squadron in World War II. And there had been high hopes in the family that I would enter the Air Force, but it just didn't work out that way. You were not called up into the Air Force and you didn't get to the Air Force. Anyway, that's how it felt for me on the ground. But an interesting thing about him was that when I grew up, we always loved it when he visited because he'd tell such amazing stories because they flew mosquitoes. And they would fly unarmed mosquitoes very high over Europe. And they were the first people to encounter the Messerschmitt 262s. And they had a couple of pilots shot down in mysterious circumstances before they realized it was these fighter jets. And then at the end of the war in, I think, 1945 sometime, he flew his operational mosquito from Cairo to South Africa. And that's the one that is now in the War Museum. It's that very plane, and it's still got his monogram on it, which is "Lovely Lady." So yeah, just a bit about that. And then I would like to talk about something that Roland de Vries mentioned in his, I think in his first, well, he had two interviews with you. In one of them, he mentioned, community security and everything. And I have, over the past couple of years, been involved in a neighborhood watch that got involved with something that he mentioned, and that is Namibian house robbers, Ovambo guys, actually, in the Western Cape, who are very, very good at doing hit-and-run raids. It's something akin to farm attacks. Although they generally go for houses on the edge of cities, on the rural edge. And in Cape Town, where I was in 2018, this Ovambo gang had been operating from Hout Bay Township. And what they do is they will walk in to the target through bush or mountain. Long walk. And then they will scout the area that they're going to attack. And their modus is to walk into a house that has not been armed with security. So they will do it while the people are still awake, generally. and just walk in. And then tie everyone up, usually quite politely, but if there's any kind of resistance, there would be instant violence. So I got involved because I thought, the whole security apparatus here on the urban edge, because in Cape Town, and we're talking of the Constantia area, the edge of the city is wine farms. There's Groot Constantia and other private farms running along the mountain edge. And then they're big, expensive houses. And the people would be tied up to be discovered hours later, or maybe someone would escape. But the Neighborhood Watch had established quite an effective system of response. They had access to some good dog trackers and people who were quite good on the mountain in the dark. But the whole thing was organized around conventional security systems. So it was basically road-oriented and light-oriented. And here were people who were coming in from pitch darkness with no technology, and they were the winners every single time. So I started with the organization, and I said, listen, what we need to do is occupy their safe area, which is the dark bush. And this is all stuff that I picked up at Oshibello and everything. So basically to exploit the terrain that they regard as the area that's safe for them to approach and escape in. So we need to take over that area. And we can't take it over with spotlights and surveillance technology because they'll simply avoid it. And that stuff lights you up in the dark. So what I started doing was taking just two of us, very small team, doing observations on the mountain. So we go climb up in the mountain and we followed a very strict protocol that we first had to explore the terrain in the day so that you were very familiar with the terrain, because you can't just head out into the bush down a dark path at night. You can't do that. So very familiar, and then use all the experience of all the previous robberies, because these guys were good. They were robbing a house successfully twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week, sometimes several nights in a row. They were that good, and quite a big deployment of security personnel was unable to apprehend or stop them. So we had already, using maps, a very good idea of the paths they used. So I did further exploration, and we managed to, out of the whole mountain, come down to just 2 paths that the guys were using. And then we put observation positions on those paths at night. And the deployment was important because you're in a terrain where people can see you from hilltops and mountains. So we would deploy in a car down a driveway in someone's house, get out of the car with no lights, and then go through a hole in the fence of that property straight into the mountain. So we would deploy quietly, and we wouldn't deploy in the day because they would have their spotters sitting on the mountain peaks. So you couldn't do anything visible. So, and then also I brought in cell phone hoods because we were sending WhatsApp messages to each other. But then now that's a light which can be seen a long distance. So everything was very dark. And what we did gradually was work out exactly which paths they were using. And I encountered them a number of times. And I worked out that I could hear them approaching 30 seconds away. And they were not completely quiet, and they would walk in a fairly tight group of 4 guys, and they would whisper to each other. So I could hear them 30 seconds away. So I developed a protocol that we could walk the paths for 10 seconds at a time and then listen. And we were walking quietly, whereas they were walking from A to B. And eventually I had a decent contact with them. There was no arrest or anything, but we had an exchange of ideas at that contact. I was hit on the head with a bolt cutter, and they got a whole lot of very nasty pepper mixture in their faces. didn't draw a firearm because of the legalities of that. But I'm not sure that would be my, if I'm going to be thrown with a bolt cutter, maybe I will have a firearm in my hand next time. But the main point is that the robberies simply stopped. They stopped point blank. And this group that had been operating out of Hart Bay, then I think they moved to Grabo. They moved to Grabo, and I believe they're still operating in that area, you know, Hermanus, Grabo, Somerset West, and they're doing the same thing. So we started a little thing, a protocol that can work, but you've got to, the point is to use counterinsurgency techniques to make their terrain unsafe for them. And the metaphor that I used for the group was, we are the sharks in the dark water. They don't know where we are, but we're somewhere in that water, and you're not going to swim in that water. So that's the point. It was prevention more than anything. So that's something that came direct from the military training right down to the present. And I think it's something worth sharing.
Absolutely. I mean, you've taken that early 80s training that stuck in your head, and you then went and used it successfully. So yeah, I'm sure there would be others that would be interested, and when they see this, you could go and give them a bit of a heads up, or if you feel so to do so.
I'd love to, and I know some of the dog tracking guys would be keen to supply their expertise in other places. The thing with the dogs is that the dog track team can only move at walking speed. That guy can't just let his dog go. And we know that the what shall we call them? They're a kind of insurgent, really. They will tolerate the dog 300 meters behind them, but they'll never panic and run. They'll sprint for a short period to gain that distance, but then they'll walk again to conserve their energy. So the great value of the dogs was to establish on a map the routes they habitually use. And that's the most important thing. The most important thing is to develop good intelligence about how they operate.
Absolutely. And it seems to be key here. They like operating in mountainous situations or areas where they've got escape routes, pre-planned escape routes if things go wrong. So if you start, as you say, if you start maneuvering in their dark waters, they know there's a presence there, and that is more prevention than which is a good thing before it starts.
And the presence you maintain must be invisible. They mustn't say, "Oh, there he is." They must never know where you are. Yeah, that's the important aspect of it. Yeah.
I hope they don't watch Legacy Conversations.
Well, then maybe they'll just get another job or something.
Yeah, or go back north.
Yeah.
Anyway, anything more? Is there a specific organization or group that we can share the contact details with to help with this?
I don't really know. I'm sure it would be a local community security neighborhood watch type groups who might be interested in this. But like I say, I think some of the dog trackers might be interested in working, but it's something that's got to be done over time. There's no quick fix. You've got to work at it. But then when you do work at it, it's it's not labor intensive at all. 2 guys, and you can be quite safe in the bush because you're quiet, it's dark, no one can find you. So you immediately have the advantage when you're stationary. So it's not I don't think safety is a huge concern unless you're keen to have contact. But it's something that can be done quite easily by a few people and make a big difference.
It sounds like that, and it sounds to me like to dovetail with the work that Roland de Vries is doing in educating people all across the country to look after themselves.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so I was very pleased to listen to him talk about that. And I thought, yeah, what wonderful work he's doing. And I hope it takes effect. And if it's done across the board, I think we can turn things around in this country. Even though it may seem too late, but you know what, when I was talking to Roland in the years ago, after his book launch, he said, you know, it's never too late. It's never too late. So that's quite an inspiring thing to consider.
Yeah, make a difference. People say, well, I can't do anything, but if you get off your posterior and attempt to do something, maybe you can do something. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Says he sitting here in the safe environment of the Republic of Ireland. The most danger I see is slipping on the rocks when I'm down at the beach. Internet, just before we go, we're going to ask Evan if there's anything else he'd like to say. But from my side, I'm going to say, as per always, until we meet again, God bless.
And from my side, I've got nothing more to add, except thank you very much for this opportunity. I think you're doing great work, and go well. Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. And yes, thank you for coming and chatting with us. And all the links will be provided. And anybody watching this that needs to contact Evan for details on that great work he was doing there in Constantia area, you can email. The email address will run up, along the bottom here. You can email us and we will pass the information on to Evan. Thank you once again, as I say, until we meet again, God bless.